Hello everyone. Thank you for joining us at Debtor's Advocate, where Nic and Harman break down debt.
So the purpose of this podcast is to provide information, completely unbiased information for you so that you can understand what your options are, what things are out there about debt. Debt is that one thing that people just don't talk about. So we need to talk about debt. We need to bring it out in the open, expose it, and have a normal conversation about what's happening with debt. So Harmon and I, who have been working together for quite a while now, decided, you know what, why don't we just make this available to everybody? So we decided to make this podcast. We will gladly take questions, FAQs. We're going to tackle everything that you were worried to ask about, didn't even know that you needed to ask about, and we're going to tackle all those things in this podcast. The podcast shouldn't last any longer than 15, 20 minutes, just a nice a period of time for you to be able to listen to on your commute, possibly while you're walking the dog, and then provide you with all that information so you can make the best choice for you.
We're with BNA Debt Solutions, Barry Nicole and Associates Debt Solutions. We've been around for over 20 years. It's a family-run business, and primarily we focus and service in Alberta. We have team members with decades of experience that are on board, and we have helped thousands of Albertans over the past years. And we, as Nic mentioned, will be dealing with all sorts of questions that we can help you understand and make debt-related questions easier. We'll try to simplify them, and we will definitely be looking for your input on these matters going forward, so we can make sure that we're always improving and working to deliver the best source of information to you as possible.
Right. So a little bit about myself. So now you know BNA and who we are and what we do. Harmon knows I've been in the industry for a really long time. I've been working in insolvency, which is bankruptcies and consumer proposals, for the last 4 years. And even before that, I was working in credit counseling. So a lot of people talk about that as an adjacent type of industry. Ultimately, I've been helping people deal with their finances and dealing with their debts for over a decade. I started in Ontario, right, Harmon? So I wasn't even in Alberta. I started in Ontario with a credit counseling nonprofit out there. And I lived in Windsor, Ontario. Woohoo! Shout out to Windsor, Ontario. And Windsor has a very high unemployment rate, has always had a high unemployment rate since the automotive industry kind of took a turn for the worst in 2008, and never really recovered from that. Kind of like what Alberta's going through with the oil patch right now. It just seems to follow me. It's not my fault. I'm sorry, Alberta. I didn't bring it with me. So I helped a lot of people out there, and we talked about debt and how to manage it. A lot of people were living on low incomes, and it was really difficult for them. And then I decided to get into bankruptcies and proposals and working for a licensed insolvency trustee because I felt like I had more available options to help people with. So I moved out to Alberta, packed up my whole family. We put on our cowboy hats and cowboy boots and came out here. My husband is now a fully fledged Albertan. He wears camo all the time. He goes hunting, and the first thing we purchased when we got here was a pickup truck. So we are all set. And now I'm here helping people in Alberta with their debts, and I work for Barry. He's a fantastic trustee, and it's been phenomenal. Other things that I do to help out in the community with tackling debt and finances is I also teach a financial coaching course. It was through Bow Valley College, and now it's transitioned to Caria, which is a nonprofit organization here in Calgary that helps people with any types of services that they need. So I love just meeting people, talking to people, teaching them how to get themselves out of debt and how to get themselves into financial wellness, as well as teaching people to teach other people how to do it. So it's my passion. I could talk about finances for legitimately hours on end. So this is a good news for me. In my spare time, I like hiking. So it's good that we moved here. In Windsor, we just have lakes, and here we have mountains. So I go out hiking all the time. I got 2 kids, one with special needs. So I know the challenges that come with that financially for people. And like I say, I've got a hunting husband, so I tend to be a hunting widow at least half of the year. So that's a bit about me. How about you, Harmon?
So I'm sure you'll agree, Nicole. Alberta is home now, and it has been, well, for me it has been for the past 20 years, but for you too now, Nicole.
I live here now.
Yeah. So I'm Harmon, and I'm a chartered insolvency structuring professional. I'm also here working with BNA. The idea of, as Nicole mentioned earlier, coming up to this podcast was, living in Alberta, I mean, we've seen lots of ups and downs here. So debt is not something that was new to anybody that has lived in Alberta here, because we've seen lots of waves with the oil downturns, the economy, the housing booms, busts. So when we decided to do this podcast, we had that in mind. I used to do a radio show in the past, so this was also great news for me. Like Nicole said, we're both two people who love meeting new people and can talk on hours on different topics, no problem. And we love helping individuals. So we try to do what we can outside of work, trying to volunteer, work with nonprofit organizations, trying to add and give back to the community, so we can kind of work for the betterment of our society. But mainly on this podcast, we'll be tackling a lot of the debt questions. So I'll try to simplify and break down all sorts of different topics in the coming days here. And we're more than happy to take suggestions on if there's a specific topics that you want us to cover. We'll try to keep them focused around more so in the Alberta news. So we'd be happy to cover topics around the area. So if you're looking for certain information on certain topics, feel free to suggest to us what you want us to cover, and we'll be more than happy to dig into that for you.
So let's talk a little bit about maybe some of the players that you might run into when you're dealing with debt. So obviously we have the creditors. Let's talk about those first, Harmon. I mean, we got, most of the time, they're major banks. You guys know the major 5 banks that you're going to be dealing with. We got credit unions. We've got third-party lenders. There's a lot of different types of creditors that are going to be out there. So they're kind of one of the players that we all might run into. And after that, we'd be talking about who is in the field. So like I said, in my history, I work for credit counseling. So credit counseling is a nonprofit society out there that is able to help people with their debts. Another player might be somebody called Money Mentors. They're a program that's federally regulated. They're also a nonprofit. So we'll talk a little bit about what they do in their programs.
And I mean, as we use the word creditor, I know some of you may be unfamiliar with it, but creditor is what we call person, institution that has lent you the money. So to whom any money is owed, we call them a creditor.
Technically, I bought coffee yesterday, so I'm a creditor to Harmon.
Yes. So hopefully that simplifies that. So we think, there's, as we mentioned, so essentially there's a number of different players that come into account when we're dealing with this. And we try to, we're a licensed insolvency trustee firm. So BNA is a licensed insolvency trustee firm. Our opinion is unbiased and impartial. So we're here to provide you the honest information so you can hear it from firsthand from us, because typically, nowadays there's lots of information available on the internet, but the right information may be hard to find because there's lots of misinformation also out there when it comes to, topics related to debts, your financials, whether it's dealing with bankruptcies, consumer proposals, what's a trustee, how can we deal with debts, what's covered, what's not. So that's our goal, to kind of eliminate that barrier so you have access to first-hand information from us, so we can provide you that guidance to let you know what each topic essentially holds and what to kind of expect when you do certain things in insolvency. So insolvency is the word that we use anytime you are insolvent, where you're unable to pay your debts as they become due, or your total assets are less than what your total liabilities equal out to. So we define that as insolvency. So that's the term we use in the industry.
So let's dig into what is a licensed insolvency trustee, right? It's a big word. We shorten it to LIT. We're both in training. We're LITs in training. And Barry and Linnea here in our office, and Glenn up in Edmonton are LITs. So we say we're all lit up. All right, maybe that wasn't as funny as I thought it was, but
we're lit.
So a licensed insolvency trustee is somebody who's been licensed by government through the Office of the Superintendent of Bankruptcy to perform consumer proposals and bankruptcies. And only licensed insolvency trustees can do so. Many licensed insolvency trustees have a staff that help them out with those. So they might be called administrators. They could could be called insolvency specialists. There's a lot of names for their staff, but they have very highly skilled and trained staff to help them complete what they need to complete. So a licensed insolvency trustee, I always like to say, Harmon, like we're like a referee at a soccer match. And ultimately, we can't pick sides, right? We're bound by this giant book of legislation. And I mean, as much as I enjoy reading it at night, I would not always recommend for most people that it's an exciting read, but we're bound by that legislation, and everything that we do has to be kosher with that legislation.
Yes, and it's called the Bankruptcy and Solvency Act. So that's essentially what our rules are based out of as the referees in this game.
Yeah, and we can't, like, sometimes we're going to make judgment calls that are in your favor, sometimes we're going to make judgment calls that are in the creditor's favor, but ultimately we're looking for what's the most fair option, right, between all parties. All stakeholders is what we call them. So we just want to make sure that everybody gets their rights and responsibilities are respected in all of their processes. And again, we want to make sure that everybody has all the right information, that they have a wealth of options available to them. Nobody feels like they're pressured into anything at any particular time. Going forward, we're going to kind of give you an idea of what we've got planned out for our podcast going forward. Like I say, we're going to publish one at least once a week so that you have new content to listen to. Some of the things that we're going to be exploring in depth are, obviously, we're going to talk about bankruptcy, the big bad B word. What does bankruptcy look like and what does it mean? It's not like on The Office where you just go, I declare bankruptcy. It's not that, I promise, as much as I wish it was. We'll talk about consumer proposals because everybody kind of hears about those. So we'll talk about what that looks like. We'll also talk to you about what other options are out there. There's a lot of informal type options that you can do to deal with your debt. So you need to know who all the players are. We'll talk about credit rating. I get asked that from clients all the time. How does this affect my credit? What does my credit rating look like? What is it based on? What does a bankruptcy do to my credit? Is it true I can never have credit for 7 years? I hear that all the time. So we're going to be debunking a lot of those myths there. We'll talk about a Division 1 proposal. It's a whole new world when we talk about Division 1 proposals. Another big question we get asked all the time is, how do I become a LIT? How do I become a licensed insolvency trustee? We're going to give you the ins and outs because Harmon and I are living it right now. And we'll tell you what's involved, what you need to do, where you need to go to find out. I'll tell you, it's not an easy process. It's not like one course and you're done. It's a pretty in-depth type of program. We'll talk about debt referral companies. Who are those guys? We see them marketing out there all the time. What do they offer? We're going to talk about our regulator, the Office of the Superintendent of Bankruptcy. What do they do? How do they do it? Where do they get their powers from? I'm hoping to get a few people on to our podcast so that we can talk to them about what they do. So we can get somebody from Credit Counseling Society on, maybe money mentors. We might even get a financial coach on and we'll do a little bit of an interview there. And then we're going to talk about all the specific things that might come into play if you were to file for bankruptcy or proposal. So preferences, transfers, if you've got property anywhere in the world, what happens if I want to walk away from my car? What does that look like? So we've got a lot of really good topics all set up. So you're going to have lots of content to listen to going forward.
We consider, a lot of the time when you're dealing with debts, mostly we hear this commonly. You may come up and say, is bankruptcy my only option now? And a lot of the times, it's very confusing. It's a loaded question and it's got lots of moving parts that come into play. Our goal is in those topics, hopefully we're going to be able to simplify the terms and the process for you so that you can understand what is all available to you, because bankruptcy is certainly not the only option when you're dealing with debts. There's different types of debts. Are you dealing with credit cards? You got line of credits. You got secured debts. So it's got different strategies involved on what may end up being the best option for you, because there's factors all around us and it's an ever-changing environment that impacts all of us in a kind of day-to-day life. Is your income stable? What sort of sources do we have to essentially look at certain options? So all of that will come into play, and that's how we want to simplify these coming terms that we're going to be able to cover for you here.
Yeah, so you'll be able to find us on all social media. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, we're on Instagram. We're going to have all that stuff available, as well as for most shows, we're going to have some extra resources resource materials and the show notes for you to be able to review. So that'll be available for download as well. So follow us on all those places, and we're going to be available on Apple Podcast. We're going to be available on Spotify. Anywhere you can get your podcast, we're going to be. So if you can click subscribe, that would be super helpful, because then we're going to know how many people are actually listening to us. I mean, we don't mind getting together at least once a week and chatting. That's just fine.
Yeah, because our end goal is to get information out to you. So if you subscribe and you're able to give us feedback or ask questions, that helps us to help you break down any questions you have and answer any concerns, right? So without it, as Nic said, we're going to be here, but it just helps us if you can point us to certain topics that you want us to cover, because that's what we're essentially here for, to help you get more information and use out of these podcasts. And as we mentioned, that when you're dealing with debts, you gotta keeping in mind that you want to deal with the licensed solvency trustees, because as we mentioned, our role is impartial. So we want to make sure that you get the best information out there. You can find licensed solvency trustees through the Government of Canada's website by searching Find an LIT, and you're going to be able to navigate to the closest trustee in your area that you're going to be able to directly go to if you're dealing with debts. Going forward basis, then you're going to be hearing more from us on details on that. But for any comments, suggestions, you can reach out to us. Please do. We encourage it, and we're going to be here on a weekly basis. As we mentioned, we're going to try to keep this short so that, we're not taking too much of your time in a day. You're going to be able to listen to this on a walk. We're going to try to keep it 15 to 20 minutes and deliver you cream of the crop, detailed down, boiled to the point. Essentially, you're going to be able to tune into this. So it's going to be available. We're going to try to be available on many platforms as we can. So as Nic said, stay tuned in, and please let us know if you have any feedback for us. We're more than happy to go over any topics you would suggest.
Yep. So have an awesome day, and we'll see you on the next podcast, guys.
Thanks for joining Debtors Advocate, where Nic and Harman break down debt.